friends!
I'm Naya, mom, boob nerd, board-certified lactation consultant, and lover of lipstick and curse words. I'm that weird Indian girl you knew in high school, all grown up.
And I'm Alexis, mom, birth nerd, and therapist plus doula, encouraging parents to hold joy plus what the fuck is this mess simultaneously. Some people think I'm too much, but those aren't my people. And we are the Top Knot Squad. TKS is a tiny little podcast about motherhood in real life, the good, the bad, the ugly AF.
Hosted by two women that are passionate about our beliefs and unafraid to speak our minds.
Friends that wanted to create space for all that ish we are too scared to talk about.
Are you ready to laugh, be vulnerable, and keep it real with us?
Top knots are not required.
If the Top Knot Squad content makes you laugh, nod in agreement, or makes you feel less alone, we'd love your support in the cost of producing this podcast. Visit patreon.com/topknotsquad to learn more about our budget-friendly sponsorship tiers and how you can help ensure that TKS has a future. Every little bit helps. On this episode of the Top Knot Squad, we will be discussing political activism as parents. There are many ways to be an activist. You can donate time, expertise, funds, or become a volunteer. Sometimes it's just about staying true to your beliefs, staying informed on topics you feel passionate about, and sharing what you know with others in your life. Today, we are excited to explore this topic in more depth with mom and political activist Becky Bullard. Becky Bullard is co-founder of Rouser, a Texas-based progressive media company, and co-host of the podcast The Rabble, Texas Politics for the Unruly Mob. She left a successful career as an advertising copywriter and strategist for some of the world's biggest brands like Dell and Chipotle to form Rouser, a company with a mission to bring more Texans into the political process at every level. She likes to think of Rouser as the kale brownie of Texas politics, real substance that feels like a treat. On the Rabble podcast, Becky and co-host Ashley Cheng and Kristen Gunn weave in their personal experiences with everything from miscarriage to immigration alongside policy lessons and interviews with a wide range of folks, from high schoolers creating change to presidential candidates. Growing up as a devout Christian conservative whose views evolved over time to the complete opposite end of the spectrum, Becky brings a unique perspective to Texas politics. Thank you for being here with us today.
I am so happy to be here. Thank you for saving me from bedtime today.
We're all being saved from bedtime right now.
Big perk of podcasting. Well, I was really, when I saw your bio about your background as Christian conservative and kind of how that's evolved over time, I'd love if you could start by sharing a little bit more about maybe how that inspired your journey to where you are.
Yeah, so I grew up Baptist, and it influenced every part of my life up until I went to college. And that was the first time I think I really was around other people who had a different background and upbringing and belief system than I did. Mm-hmm. And so it forced me to challenge everything that I had believed. And I started to see that the people that I was meeting who were gay or who were different in other ways, like, didn't seem evil. And it just made me kind of rethink about everything I had been taught growing up. And just the more personal stories I heard of people who I had been told were wrong in some way, I started to see that everything that I had been told now was thrown into question. And so I had to kind of figure it all out from square one. And I'm still in the process of doing that.
Well, I think we can all kind of relate to that too, and maybe not from a conservative Christian standpoint, but definitely, I was always in high school and stuff. They meaning the other kids in my class, referred to me and my best friend Elizabeth as the feminazis because we had the crazy notion that women should be treated as people, and so it was a Catholic high school, and I feel like that was a huge part of it, but. They just knowing, I feel like growing older, that saying of, oh, as you get older, you're going to be more conservative, you're going to be more this, the opposite has been true for me. I feel like I'm even more of liberal-minded and open-minded to a lot of things than I was growing up. So I can definitely relate a little bit to your story.
Yeah, feminazi was definitely a word I heard a lot growing up.
How about you?
Oh, we talked about that a little bit on the last episode that I'd say I feel like my whole adult life has been a lot of unlearning. And I think that that's probably true for a lot of people in some form or fashion. So
Yeah.
we're all on the journey together.
That's right.
I think it's good to remember that too. Like everybody that you meet, even if they're not in the same place as you, like they're on a journey too, and maybe like someday soon they'll be in the same place you are.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good point. I think giving people a little bit of grace is a big part of just being a decent human being.
Totally. And I hope that to give myself that grace as I continue to learn, and that other people will, give me the benefit of the doubt that I'm trying my best.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Go ahead. So we do this like 8 times in a podcast episode. I was going to ask, how did Rouser form and how did Rabble come to be?
Yeah. So I historically, through most of my life, thought of politics as a dark hole that I wanted nothing to do with. That was filled with, like snakes and men who like
so hard to believe.
What? No.
No, that's 100% what I used to think. I thought it was just like, a bunch of power hungry dudes sending dick pics to ladies who didn't want them. And I think that's partially true. But really everything kind of started for me in 2013 when Wendy Davis did her filibuster over this extreme abortion bill. And, she was in the Texas Senate at the time, and her Senate seat was in the Fort Worth district that was not safe for a Democrat. It was very much a purple district. And the fact that she stood up for something that she believed in, and was more concerned about doing the right thing than she was about being reelected, was the first time that I saw a politician do something that was right above what might be best for their career. And that was the first time I had an inkling of, okay, maybe there are good people in politics. But I didn't really do much with that inkling until the 2016 election happened. And so at the time I had a newborn. She was not quite 3 months old. So I had to go to bed before the election results were in because I knew I'd be up all night. But I could see that it wasn't going the way that I had hoped. And so I just realized with like sudden clarity, this is my fault. All I've ever done is vote. And I can see now that it's going to take more than that. And more than me, like, hoping that somebody else will create the outcome that I'm thinking should happen. I have to actually do something. And it was, I think a lot of the reason why I had not been involved in politics before, aside from thinking it was a gross place to be, was that there was so much I didn't know. It seemed too overwhelming to even start. And so I realized that I didn't have that luxury anymore of being afraid of looking dumb or asking a dumb question, that I would rather look stupid than continue forward in a world that was so far from what I wanted. So I was like, all right, I'm just going to learn as much as I possibly can and ask all the dumb questions. And it sort of became a part-time job in between raising children. And then eventually I went back to work, I think when my baby was like 6 months old. And I was just spending so much of my mental energy trying to figure out, like, okay, like, how does politics even work in Texas? I didn't know who my representatives were in Congress, let alone even an inkling of, like, who they were in the state legislature. I had no idea about all this stuff. And so I just poured myself into learning all of it like it was a job. And then eventually I was like, maybe I should make this my job. And I found these two other women who were on a similar kind of path. And I think there's a lot of us out there who like felt so fired up and didn't know what to do. And so we're trying to claw our own path in the darkness. And so Ashley Cheng and Kristen Gunn are my two business partners in Rouser and my two co-hosts on the Rabble podcast. And we just I saw them sort of like vibrating with the same need to do something that I was, and I saw what like powerful women they were, and we just combined forces to continue learning together and to create the resources that we wished had existed when we first got started in activism on November 9th, 2016. And so as a mom, I found myself, I think you guys can probably relate. If we're going to have time to ourselves, we have to like find it wherever we can and make it wherever we can. Mm-hmm. And so in my desire to learn all things Texas politics, I kept wishing that there was a podcast that existed because I found that the time after putting the kids to bed and like then going downstairs and just like really wanting to sit on the couch and do nothing but having to clean the kitchen and make lunches, and God forbid my kids like to eat the same thing and make it easy on me, like having to make them 2 totally different lunches. And like the baby, I have a 5-year-old and a 2.5-year-old little girls, and the baby's like in the 4th percentile, so I can't be like, you don't like it, tough shit, that's what you're getting. Like she would choose to starve instead. So, just like that time of day was really frustrating to me for a long time until I started listening to podcasts during that time and feeling like, oh, this is something I can do where I can passively absorb something that's beneficial to me while I'm doing a task that I don't otherwise enjoy. And so I kept wishing that there was a politics podcast focused on Texas so I could learn all these things. And I actually I was sort of like shopped this idea around to other people who I thought would be good at it. Like we had some meetings with Wendy Davis trying to convince her to do it. But I know it would be amazing, right?
Yeah.
You said no?
I know she's got deeds, not words, and a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah, well, that's what it is. I mean, her organization, Deeds Not Words, is doing so much to train young advocates. And the reason it came about that I like pitched this idea to her was because her organization is really focused on college-age women and younger. But I read some interview with her, I think it was in Texas Monthly, saying that, they track who opens their emails. And it was like a lot of women in their 30s. And I was like, that's me.
Yeah.
Yes, please start something for women in their 30s. And so we kind of pitched this idea to her. And I think, they're so busy doing so much with a small staff with what they're already doing. And she was interested in it, but I think just couldn't like wrap their minds around how to fit in one other thing.
Right. Yeah.
So eventually we were like, well, maybe we should just do it. So we did. In January, we launched the Rabble, Texas Politics for the Unruly Mob. And so we've just been trying to put out the resources that we wish had existed. Like, how does the Texas legislature work? What are all these different positions that we vote on or don't vote on because we don't understand their function in our lives? And like,
what is a comptroller?
Totally. Like all this stuff. And so we're all trying to figure this out for ourselves and trying to bring other people along with us.
What is the unruly mob?
Well, that harkens back to Wendy Davis's filibuster.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Yep.
And at the time,
makes sense now.
The lieutenant governor and who is the person who's in charge of the Texas Senate was David Dewhurst. And he, so there was this huge group of people that showed up to support this filibuster. And there's only so many people that are allowed into the room on the Texas Senate floor, or in the gallery, they call it, to watch. And so that was filled, but people still showed up. And I remember seeing tweets about it at the time. I was pregnant. And I was, not feeling well enough to go be there for it, but I brought water and Gatorade for the volunteers who were there. And so the gallery was full, and then thousands more people showed up and filled the rotunda, filled the rest of the Capitol. And Wendy Davis was actually a guest on our podcast a few weeks ago.
Oh, awesome.
And she said that it was the first time that they had ever had to close the doors to the Capitol and not let anyone else in. It was the first time in Texas history that the Capitol was filled to capacity.
Yeah.
That's how many people showed up.
I remember I was living in Fort Worth at the time, actually. We hadn't moved to Austin quite yet. And I was like, I had a friend who was live tweet. She was here. I don't think she was allowed into the gallery because, again, too many people. She was in the rotunda, but I remember sending her some money via PayPal so that she could buy pizza for everybody hanging out there from Austin Pizza, of all places. But yeah, I remember like you talking about that. I have goosebumps because that was probably the moment that I realized that I could make a difference in politics. And even if I was just a mom, not living in in Austin at the time. Yeah.
Yeah. And I love that, you mentioned donating money for pizza. And there's so many ways like that people don't always realize that they can be involved in just a small way, doing what you can. And so that's something that we try and get across to people through Rouser and through the Rabble podcast is just like small steps. It doesn't have to be something big. One of our guests, Stephanie Chiarello, who has this awesome comedy show called Over the Ledge that's all about the Texas legislature, and it's so funny. She was a guest who explained to us basically how the Texas legislature works, and she had this great line that was do more than nothing. And now that's sort of like the motto that I keep in my heart, like for people who are just overwhelmed by it all. Just do more than nothing. Like,
Yeah.
So I've definitely done like my fair share of activism. I'm a lactation consultant. So anytime that there's any laws coming up about breastfeeding and working or breastfeeding in public, I, along with several other amazing passionate women, do a lot of stuff kind of behind the scenes, whether it's drafting out emails or scripts that people can call and say the same message consistently to staffers or whatever. So just to kind of add on to what you were saying, there's definitely a lot more to do than just actually going to the Capitol and walking and talking to our elected officials. I know that for me, initially, it was really overwhelming. And even now, if I have to do it, my heart starts to race a little bit. And I'm a little nervous about going to talk to these like good old boys about boobs and what they should really be doing and all of that. But again, there's so much you can do. Just again, like you said, donating money for pizza or whatever, signing a petition or calling and leaving a message with the staffer that you do support this bill or that you don't support that bill. But yeah, I completely agree. There's definitely baby steps that you can do before you get there and start to lobby on behalf of a bill, for sure.
Totally. And everything that I've done, like, gives me a little bit more confidence for the next thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Y'all are making me think about a question that isn't on our list, is because I actually went to D.C. to lobby face-to-face with politicians.
Amazing.
I actually met with Ted Cruz, not a staffer.
And you survived.
And I survived. He was a dick. But it was amazing and very empowering. But by the end of that trip, I was pretty drained, and that whole sense of empowerment and like hope and every positive feeling that I had going into it, by the end of it, I was like, did we really do anything? Did that make a difference? I do know now, like, I think part of the answer may be like it takes time, and that it did make a difference because I know now that one of the specific bills that we were lobbying for, it passed. And that happened a whole year later. So it didn't die, and it still moved its way through. But I don't know if you have advice or tips for folks that are getting involved, and even from the smaller level of, does it really do anything to send this script letter to my legislator?
Yeah.
What do you have to say about that? Like, how do we stay empowered and feeling good about what we're doing?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it is a long game, and that's something that we have to remember, right? So it was interesting. This past weekend, we had an event that was a book launch party for a friend of mine, Casey Chapman Ross, who is a political photographer. She came out with this amazing book called True to Form that was capturing Beto's Senate campaign in photographs and also art that people had created and people's stories of being involved. And one of the things that we did as part of this launch party was to talk about what's next for Texas. And so we had a panel of, it ended up being all women, because now I can see, after having done this for a couple of years, like the people on the ground getting shit done are like 90% women. Yeah. So they talked about, their efforts, and they talked about what they see next for Texas. But we also had a couple of candidates who've announced for 2020 come. One was Julie Oliver, who's running.
I love her.
Yeah, she's amazing. She's running for Congress in Texas in the 25th district, which she closed the gap by a lot in her last campaign in 2018, and she's back again because she just can't.
She's so close.
She was so so close, and she felt like she let everyone down who was counting on like having an actual voice in Congress, not the person who currently represents them. And also MJ Hager came.
Love her too. Yep.
Amazing.
She's amazing.
She's amazing. And so she lost her race for Congress in our 31st district by only 3 points.
Oh, wow.
And she was told, when she decided to run that race, that just don't, like, there's no chance, don't even. But 3 points, that's crazy. And it's such a gerrymandered district. It's amazing that she got that close. But she decided to go even bigger this time. Now she's running for Senate.
Yes, I saw that.
In Texas. So she came to our event, and one of the things that she said was that even though she didn't win, she's been keeping an eye on the guy who's still in office, and now he started to have town halls, and now he voted in favor of the Violence Against Women Act, which that sounds like it would be a bad thing, but it's a good thing.
Yeah.
And I think this is stuff that wouldn't have happened without her scaring the shit out of him.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think we have to, look for those victories where they exist, even if they're not a victory in the traditional sense of winning the race. There's a lot of good stuff that's happening.
I actually just watched the Netflix documentary, like right before coming to the recording. What's the name?
Knock Down the House?
Knock Down the House. And Alexandria...
Ocasio-Cortez.
Her. She's... Because it's actually... Well, I guess this is a spoiler. I don't know if
I haven't seen it yet.
I mean... I'm just going to say it.
Okay.
It actually is kind of a depressing ending because a lot of the people that they're following don't win their races. But she does, obviously. But they show a scene where she's on the phone with one of the women that lost. And I'm not going to quote this correctly. She said something like, sometimes... the win is one of us gets in. If it's not all of us, at least one of us is in. She said it way more beautifully than I just did. But you're making me think about that, is that there are small wins along the way. And even though the other women didn't win their races, there was still something to celebrate, and there was still some progress made. Yeah. And even just thinking from a larger scale of how many women won seats that didn't exist before.
It's a record number.
Yeah.
And the other thing, too, is, so one of the things that I've talked about with my other activist friends who were involved volunteering for Beto's campaign is this experience that a lot of us have had of after the 2018 election and Beto lost. I had friends calling and texting me from out of state being like, "Oh, are you okay?"
Yeah.
And I was like, "I'm freaking great." Like, I didn't shed a tear. I mean, we came so close. We built this network of people who are fired up, a lot of us for the first time getting involved. And we accomplished so much at the state level. We flipped 12 seats in the Texas House and 2 in the Texas Senate, which is huge.
It is huge, yeah.
We are now 9 seats away from having Democratic control of the Texas House, which means that then we get to decide how the districts are drawn, not just for Texas, like the Texas legislature, but our congressional districts, which is like enormous.
Yeah.
So I'm super excited. And I think I'm also an eternal optimist. So I always gravitate to the things, even if they're very small,
But no, I mean, with the gerrymandering, that typically tends to happen, at least in Texas. And with Julie Oliver, for instance, that District 25 is huge. It goes all the way up to Burleson, which is like 100 miles and 120 miles north of here. It's massive. So I agree. I think sometimes it's all these little victories that add up to a much bigger change across the state. Yeah.
And the other thing, too, that I've gained that has been so powerful for me beyond any sort of like electoral victories or movement on bills or stuff like that is just the people that are now in my life that would not have been before I started getting involved. Like, I have met some of the most incredible, inspiring people that I know are going to be in my life forever now. And that's worth it alone.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point.
You're making me think of, I know that you make it clear on you guys' podcasts that y'all are progressive. You're clearly all Democrats. I think we've made it pretty clear where we stand.
Yeah, somebody's listening in for the first time today. Yeah. Guess what? Yeah.
But I would like to open the conversation to how do we have these conversations, across the political spectrum, and not create more of a divide. I actually hate that word, divisiveness. I think that it honestly is used from a white supremacist perspective of this is going to shut down the conversation of you challenging me. But I do also see that we're a very divided nation. We're very siloed. Brene Brown talks about that all the time. So can we talk about that a little bit? Like, how do you weave that into your podcast? And how do you navigate conversations, especially with your background, with your own network before you got into this work?
I wish that I could come in here with a really good answer for this. But this is something that I'm really still trying to figure out myself. And it's been really interesting to me. So my parents voted for Trump in 2016. And when I found that out, I was heartbroken. And I kind of just didn't even know what to do with that information. I felt personally betrayed. I felt like, after grab him by the pussy and all this stuff, I couldn't imagine, like I have 2 little girls, like they have me, like how could they? And so I was too hurt and heartbroken to really even directly bring it up to them, which I'm not proud of. But what I'm learning, who I'm learning from is actually my mom, because she saw how heartbroken I was. And as a mom myself, now I can understand like what that did to her to see me hurting like I was. And so it's been really amazing to watch her response. Like she sees everything that I'm doing, and she sees, the stuff that I post on social media, because we're very waspy. We don't like directly talk about this stuff very much. Right. And we avoid confrontation. But she knows where I stand, and she sees everything I'm doing and how upset I was. And she really made an effort to try and understand where I was coming from, and to try and keep, she was the one who was doing all the bridge building to me. Like I was just too, I don't know, just too destroyed and too didn't know how to deal with it. But she has been incredibly supportive of my activism, and now I've turned it into my career. And she's even like watched Beto's Take a Knee video that was, he answered a question about did he think it was acceptable for football players to take a knee, and that went viral. And like, I know my mom wouldn't have done that except for she was trying to find a way to me, and now she's like, I feel embarrassed. Like I couldn't vote for Trump again. Like she's really, and so what I'm trying to do is learn from her, who's doing a much better job than I am of reaching out and trying to understand. And I think that like treating everybody like somebody that you love so much that you don't want to lose them in your life is probably a good way to do it. Yeah. So that's what I'm trying to teach myself now from watching my mom.
I love that.
Yeah, I do too. Just kind of on that note, when it comes to kids and getting them active in politically, what is your viewpoint on things like bringing them to marches or rallies or what have you? Because while it's great for them to see change in action, the chant, this is what democracy looks like, all of that. How can we do it in a way that would not be damaging to them or shocking or alarming to them?
Yeah, this is something that I'm also still trying to figure out for myself. But I also have realized that the more that I bring my children to, the more I realize that I probably am not giving them enough credit when I try to protect them.
Okay, that makes
sense. But I also like, it's a balance between that and speaking to them in an age appropriate way. So, for example, I took my older daughter, who was 4 at the time, to like a anti-gun violence march. And so she was asking me what different signs said, and she was asking me questions about what was going on. And so I just like, it just came out of me like a way of explaining it to her that would make sense to her, which was that, you know, all of these people are here because they're worried that other people will get hurt by guns. And we don't want that to happen. And when I thought about it afterwards, I'm like, it's, when you boil it down for a 4-year-old, like that's really the heart of the issue. And she was like, yeah, okay. And I said, you know, some people have guns that shouldn't have them and they might hurt people. And we think those people, they shouldn't have those guns. And she, you know, she's always trying to solve problems. And she was like, oh, but I would get out of the way so fast and I wouldn't get hurt by the gun.
Yeah.
And at first I was like, that's hilarious. And then I was like, oh, God.
I know.
You know, like this is what, and children are having to have these thoughts because they're doing lockdown drills in their classroom.
Yep. Yeah. We did a topic in our first season of when the bomber was going around in Austin and how to talk to your kids about really hard topics. And it was a lot of making it to be age appropriate and palatable to where they realize that, yes, there is a fear, but do it in such a way so that they're not just consumed by it and just anxious small people. And I completely agree with you. I know it's something I'm working on constantly, and not to speak for you, Alexis, but I know it's something that you and I have talked about too, just in text conversations. Like, how the hell do we handle this? What do we say to them? Things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, y'all are making me think about, I think I wrote down somewhere about the golden rule. Yeah. Like I was just like thinking about like old time, at least from my childhood, the messages I received of like, what's the golden rule? We're colorblind. You know, all of these messages that now I know were very sugar-coated and didn't really serve me well. And those are things that I'm now unlearning, you know, or that I am in the process of unlearning as an adult. And so it was bringing me back to the original part of our conversation of how do I do this work? How do I get involved? How do I have time to do it? And so I think because I often have friends who like tell me like because I'm so social justice minded, like I oftentimes hear like, I don't understand how you do that. I don't have time for that. I don't have the brain for that, like all of these things. And it's like, you know, the biggest thing that I'm doing is mothering. Like that's the biggest thing that I'm doing. So all this information about social justice, I'm feeding to my children in age-appropriate ways.
Yeah.
And that is making a difference for our future as well. So I think that that's a huge thing that parents already have at their disposal. Like, you don't have to go to things. You can just parent consciously.
Yeah. No, it's so true. Like, I think one of the best things we can possibly do is create good humans.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Mothering or parenting really is definitely a form of activism and a good way to kind of, you know, spread those crazy feminazi thoughts. I'm doing air quotes right now for people to see. Quote unquote feminazi thoughts. Yeah.
This was actually also a question from a listener, so I'm just going to read it now because it's related to what we're talking about. But Sarah of Therapist Mom Circle asks, sometimes I don't know what is most impactful. Is it our time, our money? I can work and make money to donate, or I cannot work and show up. But at the early childhood stage, giving money feels much more manageable than giving time. So we've kind of talked about that a little bit, but is there anything else that you want to add?
Yeah, so this is actually a question that I wrestled with before leaving a full-time job to start Rouser, which currently makes me next to no money.
Kind of like this.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you would like to sponsor the Rabble podcast.
Or the Top Knot Squad.
Either one is worth your while. So yeah, I was working full-time at Dell before I quit that to start Rouser. And I wrestled with that question myself. Like, is it more impactful for me to continue doing this work that is not very important to me, but pays me a really good salary and lets me donate to causes that I believe in? Or should I like take this crazy leap and spend all of my time like being an activist, which is a privilege that most people do not have. And I talked to several people about it, and they were like, obviously, like, your heart is telling you that you have to do this, right? So like you will think about it every day forever until you die if you don't do it. And I'm like, okay, you're right. So for me, that was the answer. But no, everyone can quit their job and become a full-time activist, I realized. But I think it's really just about finding the balance of things that are right for you. And maybe what you do today is different than what feels comfortable for you next week or in a month or next year or when your children are older. So the other thing that I have found very helpful for myself is to give myself permission to not feel like I have to execute everything perfectly. For instance, during the 2018 election cycle, I signed up to do block walking, and I knew that I was going to have to bring my 2-year-old with me. And so I knew that I probably wouldn't be able to complete the entire shift. And at the outset, I just gave myself permission to be okay with that and just to do the most that I could, and then to say, okay, that's all I can handle, or that's all she can handle, you know? So I think it's just like being okay with not having to be perfect at it, and also being okay with just doing a little bit, and that's fine if that's where you're at.
What was that quote again? Something's better than nothing. What?
Oh, do more than nothing.
Do more than nothing.
Yeah.
That's what you just described.
And the other thing, too, that I find keeps me active is like getting an activist buddy to do stuff with. So that if it comes down to like an hour before the rally or whatever it is that I'm planning on going to, and I'm like, I don't know if I want to do that. But like somebody is counting on me to do it with them, then I'll stick with it, you know?
Yeah. There's power in numbers and, the peer pressure to do it almost.
And also it makes it more fun.
It does make it more fun.
So it's like, okay, we'll go to this rally and then we'll go get lunch afterwards. And it's like a social thing.
Yeah,
totally.
Absolutely. It's a really good point. And so you basically just answered the next question that I had, which is what you recommend for people who, especially parents who want to become more politically active. And then basically I asked, is there a step above online petitions but below actually speaking to elected officials that you'd recommend? And so I think what you described there with having a buddy and being able to know before you go into it what you can manage and what you're realistically able to do. And like you said, know that that's okay. And that as things change and your kids get older, I think that's a great answer. I think that's something a lot of our listeners can definitely relate to. That may be struggling with how to get more politically active, but not knowing where to start, because it can be really daunting if you look at the long list of things that need to be done.
Yeah. And when I was first getting started in activism, people gave me the advice of pick one issue that speaks to you and just focus on that so that you don't become overwhelmed by all the things. I decided not to do that, even though I do think it's good advice. I decided that the way that I could be most effective was by learning as much as I possibly could and disseminating all of that information about all the things to all the people, so that hopefully then I'm like multiplying my own efforts by empowering other people to find the things that they care about.
Yeah.
And so one of the ways that we do that at Rouser is we have a weekly newsletter that goes out on Fridays, and instead of TGIF, it's TGIF. And it's just an animated GIF and like one thing that you can do.
That's awesome. That's cool.
It's usually very simple, either like a petition or just like something easy that you can do that is kind of like, we try to be sort of like the gateway drug to democracy.
I recently learned that reproductive justice is a term that is used to be more inclusive of multiple issues. So when we are looking at things through a reproductive justice framework, it's not just about abortion or access to birth control, but it's immigration, it's family leave, it's mental health, it's so many different things tied into that all go back to justice around reproductive issues. Yeah. So you made me think about that when you were talking about a single issue. I was like, well, that's my single issue, but it's actually all the issues.
Sneaky single issue.
Yeah.
No, I was going to move on to our next question and just say that on your website, you offer some simple, straightforward shit to do to turn Texas blue. Is there a particular episode that we can of Rabble that we could have our listeners recommend?
Oh, man.
Recommend to our listeners?
Well, so at the end of every episode, we give some shit to do. And a lot of times it is specific to that week, especially now that the Texas legislature is in session, because a lot of times it has to do with a bill that needs to be acted on right away. But I definitely have some favorite episodes. I mean, the one with Wendy Davis is a really great one, because I think her interview, she was just so generous with us with her time and had a lot of great stuff to say. Another one that I really love that your listeners might be interested in is we interviewed Jody Casey, who was Beto's campaign manager for his Senate campaign. And we talked to her about, she was new to politics when she took on that role, which is a huge role to take on for a mom of young kids who is new to politics.
Wow.
And so we asked her about that, and I asked her about her thoughts on making politics more inclusive for parents of young kids, because it is intimidating, and a lot of times events happen at times that are not convenient.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I'm starting to discover as a mom of young kids who wants to be really involved is that, and I think this is true for any underrepresented group, is just by showing up, you force people to think about the barriers that you face by being there. And so the more of us that get involved, the more people have to think about like creating space for us and making it less difficult to be involved. So that was kind of one of the things that we touched on with Jody. Yeah, I mean, I don't know, they're all great.
Those are good starting points.
Yeah, sure.
Well, I'm also just thinking in general, we probably have many listeners who are listening to this episode and are like, I feel lost. I don't understand what they're talking about. So as far as like shit to do, what would be like a simple first step for folks that have never really been involved and don't know where to start?
Yeah. So one of the first things that I did was I found my local Indivisible group. And Indivisible is this awesome grassroots organization that they are former staffers, actually, of Lloyd Doggett, who is one of our local area U.S. congressmen. And these staffers had seen the Tea Party come to power, and they basically took notes of their tactics that made them successful and turned them into this guide, the Indivisible Guide, for progressives who also want to create change. So a lot of groups sprang up out of that, and that was the first, my first involvement was finding my local Indivisible chapter, and they organize office visits, and they also the most helpful thing for me was they connected me with other people so that I wasn't doing it alone, because a lot of my friends weren't ready to be involved. And so it was just me like trying to figure it out on my own. And so it connected me with a group of like-minded people who were also trying to figure it out and who weren't going to judge me for not already knowing all this stuff. So for me, that was a great place to start.
And I think I met you at one of their events.
Oh, nice.
Jamie drug me along.
Yes,
and
no,
she introduced
totally.
us at, because, no, it was someone else. You said, what was the name you said? Lloyd Doggett?
Lloyd Doggett, yeah.
No, I have his ruler still on my desk, whoever the person was that day that they were talking about. But that's where I met you, at one of those.
Oh, that all makes sense now. But one of the other first things I did was learn who my reps were.
Yeah, I was just going to say that.
Like, I didn't know that. And so I was shocked to discover. So, I had been living in Austin all this time, voting straight Democrat, and just thinking, like, all my reps were cool Democrats. No. Because of gerrymandering, in the U.S. House of Representatives, my representative at the time, now I'm blanking on his name. He's terrible, and he retired, and now his replacement is Chip Roy, and he's even worse than the dude. Lamar Smith was the dude before. And so I was shocked to discover that he was my rep, because I just didn't know. And actually the reason that I went from like despair into action was because there was some news story about him that he said that we should just get our news from President Trump, and that should be our source of truth. Wow. And when I saw that, I was flipping tables in my mind. I was like, what? This guy represents me? This is crazy. And so, know who your reps are, because it might shock you.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It shocked me. Now I'm drawing a blank on my dude's name. MJ.
Oh, yeah.
Is going against him.
John.
Cornyn.
Nope.
No.
Yes.
No.
Yep.
Yes.
Yes.
That's
Cornyn.
it. Yes.
Yeah.
In the Senate. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I like started reading his website, I was like, ugh.
Yeah.
What? Yeah. It was a bad day.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
Yeah.
So.
And then I know we've talked a lot about what to do to get started, but any advice on what not to do, or things that might set you back, either as an activist or anything like that?
Mm-hmm. I think what not to do is don't be hard on yourself for not having done more already.
Okay.
For one thing. Don't be hard on yourself for, like I said, if you have to leave something early or if you just like can't give it your all, like don't, just be easy on yourself. That's kind of the biggest tip there. And I don't know, like I'm still struggling with trying to find balance. I'm one of those people who just went all in. And so I'm trying to find balance in my life of like, I don't know, not being on Twitter constantly and stuff like that. But the nice thing about being a mom is it's a forced break from work, whatever your work is, right? Like it's very challenging to try and do anything while caring for a small child.
Yes.
So I think, really enjoy those moments of being forced to do nothing but focus on your kid and just like enjoy that is a good,
Yeah.
Don't not do anything.
Yeah.
I'm going to add that. Hopefully this podcast is inspiring you in some way to do something.
Yes.
Yeah. I think we're out of time.
I think so too. Yeah. It's about that time.
Well, we
Thank
really
you,
appreciate you
guys.
coming on.
Oh my gosh, this has
Yeah.
been a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, it was super fun.
Yeah. Thank you. And so we'll definitely link to Rouser and to Rabble in our show notes for our listeners so that they can start listening to you, sign up for your mailing list and all of that stuff.
And we always tell people, feel free to reach out directly to us on social media. We're at RouserTX, RouserTX on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And like, if you are feeling like you want to show up to something, but you're nervous about it, truly, we're excited to be your buddies. So just reach out to us and we're happy to, give you our advice or literally meet up in person with you and like show you the door of where to go. Like we'll do all those things.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. That definitely makes like walking around the Capitol and talking to people a little bit easier. It's like, okay, well, I'm not the only one who doesn't know what she's doing.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
It was funny. We were in the Capitol recently and ran into Julie Oliver and she was like wandering around lost. And I'm like, okay, if Julie Oliver could get lost in the Capitol, I don't have to feel so dumb about it.
Exactly. That thing is like, it's a labyrinth. It's
It
so big.
is. Yeah.
That's funny, random aside, but as a doula, I always still get lost no matter what hospital I go to, no matter how many times I've been there. It's just the type of space, like Capitol, hospital. They're just big systems that are overwhelming. So even if you go there regularly, you can get lost.
Yeah, for sure.
So cool. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah.
Awesome.
If the Top Knot Squad's content makes you laugh, nod in agreement, or makes you feel less alone, we'd love your support in the cost of producing this podcast. Visit patreon.com/TopKnotSquad to learn more about our budget-friendly sponsorship tiers and how you can help ensure that TKS has a future. Every little bit helps.
If you like what you hear, then be sure to click the subscribe button in your podcast app. While you're there, leave us a review. You can find us on social media. Just search for Top Knot Squad. We welcome your feedback and love making new friends.